Welcome to Soul Care, a pause in your week to reflect on some things that really matter. We all have needs. We don't usually think of them as spiritual needs, but I believe they are spiritual because all big life questions are spiritual. They have to do with meaning and having purpose in community and having love in our lives. People can endure tremendous physical suffering if they have meaning and purpose and love. When I was a hospital chaplain doing my clinical pastoral education, my task was to meet every patient coming in to the hospital during my shift and assess that patient's spiritual needs. We were to talk to each person admitted and find out by asking questions how they were doing. Doctors and nurses were concerned about physical needs and sometimes emotional or social needs, but they really didn't attend to spiritual needs. Was the person's greatest spiritual need for meaning and direction in life? Or was the person's greatest spiritual need for self-worth in community? Or was the person's spiritual need to love and be loved? These are the big questions. At first, it seemed impossible to assess this spiritual need in a person who was a complete stranger, but we found that in a deep conversation, even in a short visit, one of these needs would seem to be more pressing than the others. One patient, for example, had a new cancer diagnosis. The prognosis didn't look good, and she wanted to give up completely. She said she didn't have any reason to live on. She realized that she didn't know any new direction in her life from that point forward into the next months and years that she would still have to live. She didn't know what meaning her future could have, and that was depressing. Another person was about to move to a new community, and she was deeply saddened to be stuck in the hospital and not to be able to be saying goodbye at parties and gatherings with neighbors and friends. She realized that she would be leaving her family that lived near her, and she couldn't imagine ever being accepted in a new place. She thought she would simply be alone from that point forward. She was afraid of losing all her social connections. A third person was hospitalized, anticipating surgery the next day. And when I spoke with him, I asked him if he was afraid. And he said, well, no, he wasn't afraid of the surgery, but that lying there in bed at night in the hospital all alone, he was looking over his life. And he realized that more than anything, he was sad about the fact that he hadn't seen and talked to his son in many years. He wanted to be reconciled with him. That was his need more than anything else. These are examples of spiritual needs. The first woman didn't know how to find a new path once she had cancer. The second woman was afraid of being cut off from relationships in a new place. And the man was estranged from his son and deeply sorrowful. These situations show us how life can be just out of whack when something very important is missing. Jesus had a way of speaking to spiritual needs. He met a man lying by a pool on a mat who had been ill for 38 years. And Jesus asked him, "Do you want to be made well?" And the man said he had no one to put him into the pool of water. Jesus told the man, "Stand up, take your mat and walk." The man wasn't well, you see, until he took control of his life and he found a new direction of more independence. Rather than be dependent on others, he began to participate in his own health and wholeness. That gave him a life with meaning. Another time, a Samaritan woman came to a well at the heat of the day when the other women were not there because it was too hot and they were avoiding the heat. Well, she conversed with Jesus there at the well and heard him speak about living water. Then Jesus sent the woman back into the community to go tell the others. Why? Because he knew she had been lonely, and Jesus wanted her to be integrated back into the community for her own well-being. At the end of the story, all the Samaritans invited Jesus into their homes. Jesus told people to forgive one another because without reconciliation, frankly, we're miserable. He told a story about a man who forgave his wayward son because as a father, he was in need of homecoming and forgiveness as much as was his son. I wonder which of these spiritual needs resonates with you most. Have you been missing something in your life? A sense of meaning and direction? What will I do with my life? A sense of community and self-worth in community. How can I find connection? A sense of love and acceptance. What is broken that needs fixing in my life? During this sheltering in place time, we're all missing something. We're all missing connections in community, that's for sure. We're missing seeing the people we love in many cases. I'm finding comfort in reaching out to old friends and to more distant family members with whom I haven't been in touch. This platform of soul care gives me a connection that's deeper and different with some more people in my life. I think about people that I know when I prepare my thoughts for you, and it gives me a good feeling. It's a way I can nurture my soul. People sometimes say they are spiritual but not religious. Religions can certainly provide an opportunity to meet spiritual needs, but even with organized religion, we can still have these needs. Sometimes a minister or a mental health worker can help a person work on needs. Sometimes in a small sharing group or with a trusted friend, we can dare to explore what's missing in our lives. What we find is that these needs are universal and very common. The biggest questions always have to do with something beyond ourselves. What is my life purpose? With whom will I spend my life? How can I achieve healing when things are broken down? We can turn to God for strength in asking these questions at turning points in our lives especially. Sometimes just speaking the words or even just shaping the thoughts into a prayer can help. When we dare to ask the most important questions, the ones that reveal what we most lack, then we've already taken a look at our needs straight on. The answers to our problems may be inside ourselves. If we can be at peace with who we are, then the path forward seems clearer and the burden seems lighter. The prophet Isaiah imagined every valley exalted and every mountain and hill made low, the crooked straight and the rough places plain. Beautiful words. He wrote these images with the hope that the Israelite people would return from exile to their homeland. They were strangers far from home, and they were unsure, totally unsure about their future. They understood their exile to have been due to sin, neglecting the poor and the sick. They had been torn from their people and their temple. But in exile, they realized that God was still with them. even through all of these problems. And when they were in exile, they wrote down many of their scriptures that were precious to them, and they created new lives, and they hoped for a homecoming. We live by hope, don't we? If we look deeply into ourselves and to a sense of the divine beyond ourselves, then we can find goodness. That goodness can balance our needs. Hope is at the center of our spiritual lives. Cling to it. Cling to hope. Examine your spiritual needs and take care of your soul.